Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Odyn in the Trials of Valor.
Yes, Odyn. You'd expect him to be relatively easy because he's the first boss in the tier, in this particular dungeon. But he's actually very difficult for a first boss. I guess it's because it's only a 3-boss instance. This boss kicks ass. Each of the phases has its own individual threat that you're going to be needing to counter, whether it's fighting Odyn directly or fighting the 2 mini-bosses at the beginning. So it's a very varied encounter. It's quite a long encounter. And yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get absolutely annihilated.
And because it is such a long encounter, there's a lot that we need to go over, so we're going to go straight into it and talk about Phase 1. So like Alex said, there's 2 mini-bosses that you need to deal with from the start, which is Himdall and Herjo, while Odyn just sits out the encounter on top of his throne and looks down on you. Now right on the pool, you'll want your tanks to separate the mini-bosses, because if they're within 35 yards of each other, they both take 99% less damage. So you need to keep the bosses spread permanently, otherwise you're going to do fuck all damage. Now for everyone in your raid to worry about is Himdall's Horn of Valor. At the end of this cast, he'll do a huge amount of damage to everyone in the raid, but he'll do additional damage to all targets around you within 5 yards. Which means if you're all stacked up on a single point, or even if you're close to say 2 or 3 players, the amount of splash damage you'll be putting out on the raid is going to one-shot multiple people. And this includes melee, so it's incredibly important that when this cast goes off, everyone spreads at least 5 yards, just so you're not splashing damage on top of everyone. Also to note, the boss will do even more damage to anyone within 15 yards of himself, and this is indicated by a circle. Don't stand in this either when the cast is over. Every time this ability goes off, we use a healing cooldown. It's not actually necessary in Phase 1, but by the time you do need them later on in the fight, they will be up, so you might as well save some mana and use healing cooldowns in Phase 1. The other ability that Himdall has is Dancing Blade. What he'll do is target a ranged player and throw a blade out towards them. Once the blade's landed, it will do damage to anyone nearby, and then it will just spin around on the spot, and then it will eventually despawn later on in the encounter. These blades are really obvious when they land. It's just a huge orange circle. Keep away from the orange circle, and keep away from the orange spinning blade, and you won't take any damage. Now for Herjo, you need to keep an eye on your Expel Light debuffs. What she'll do is she'll target one player in your raid, apply the debuff to them, which deals absolutely nothing until the debuff expires. It will cause that player to take a huge amount of damage, and also any other players within 8 yards of them. So when you receive the debuff, get the hell away from everyone. And healers, you want to precast these people, because sometimes the Expel Light debuff can expire when Horn of Valor is about to go off. And if you have those two go off at the exact same time, which doesn't quite happen, but it is pretty close, that player will almost be one shot. In most cases, they'll just be comboed and they'll be dead. If you precast them, that situation doesn't happen. And her most impactful ability is Shield of Light. She'll track her player for 3 seconds and an arrow will form underneath her feet, pointing towards the player. After those 3 seconds, she'll just send out a huge beam of light straight through their face, which knocks them back and deals a shit ton of damage. However, this knockback effect and the damage aspect are split between all players within the beam. So you want to put as many players as possible in this arrow to take the damage from the beam, just so that player doesn't get one shot. Keep in mind though that with this beam you can immune it, so if it's on a player such as a hunter or a mage or a paladin or something like that, if you call out very quickly, I'm going to solo it, I'm going to use an immunity, that is going to reduce damage on your raid, but to be honest, especially on heroic mode, it might be better saving those immunities for later points in the encounter where things are a little bit more hectic. The best way to deal with this ability is that as soon as you have been fixated, is run to a set location. We just decided to put that right in the middle of the room, and then everyone can stack inside the beam and the damage is split. And if it is on a melee target, you don't necessarily have to run to that location, just make sure the arrow is pointed towards it so everyone gets hit. Typically when this beam comes in, we don't use a healing cooldown for it, but if we do decide to do it, it's usually only like damage reduction, so like Spirit Link or Barrier. Try keeping away from using output cooldowns on it. Now apart from those 2 mini-bosses, we did say Odyn was on top of the throne. He isn't completely sitting there doing nothing. Every so often he'll cast Draw Power. This causes the 5 runes in the ground to light up, and then Odyn will start gaining energy. After 30 seconds, he'll reach maximum energy, and then he'll do a massive amount of damage to your raid. However, this damage is amplified by every single rune that is on the ground. Even if there's only 1 rune up, when he casts this ability, you are going to be one shot. However, when he first activates the rune, he'll also spawn 5 adds. These 5 adds will randomly pick a target and fixate them, and also brand them with a rune icon and colour. The idea is that you drag the add to the matching rune and kill the add on top of it. This deactivates the rune and makes it so Odyn's ability isn't lethal. It's incredibly important that the fixated targets react very, very quickly, because while the adds aren't inside the runes, they take 99% less damage, so you need to get them in there as soon as possible so they can actually be killed. Now this isn't so important for phase 1, but is important for later phases. If you ever have to move out of the rune for whatever reason, perhaps something's going to spawn on top of your head, or maybe you're trying to dodge a certain ability, it's a really good idea to stun the ad inside it, so when you leave, the ad doesn't leave with you. And if you do kill the ad outside of the rune, that rune will still be active, so the ad has to stay in the rune when it dies.
Now, it's important that you assign your melee DPS to be fighting Herja, while your range DPS mainly focus on Himdall. The reason this is that you want to get them both to 25% health within a 10-second window of one another. This is because when either of them reaches 25% health, that particular mini-boss will cast Revivify. This will make them immune for 10 seconds, and then after that 10 seconds when the cast is completed, they will heal themselves for an absolute shit ton. And this really isn't good. However, if both of them are casting it at the exact same time, they'll both go friendly, and then phase 2 will begin. So that's the way that you transition into phase 2. So just make sure that you have assigned your DPS to split the damage evenly between these two mobs, and then once they're both low health, you can just bring them both to 25% health within that 10-second window and transition cleanly into the next phase. If you do have any Valajar Runebearer ads up at this point, they will no longer fixate a target and they'll lose their runic shield thing, which reduces the amount of damage they take when they're not inside a rune, so you can just quickly group them up and AoE them down. Also, he will stop generating any energy that's going towards this large AoE damage that's going towards you, and the ability will just kind of cancel itself out, so you don't have to worry about that coming in anytime soon.
Now throughout this phase, Odyn will temporarily buff himself with an ability that increases his attack speed, and this stacks. The way that this ability stacks is that each time he keeps hitting the same target, his attack speed will just keep going up. The idea is that you simply taunt, then it will eventually drop. This is a lot easier to do in normal mode than it is in heroic mode, and you'll understand why in just a moment. And on top of that, he still keeps his draw power ability from phase 1, and you need to deal with that the exact same way. But the biggest thing that he does in this phase is Spears of Light. Almost constantly, these circles will appear on the ground, they'll explode, dealing damage to anyone within the targeting circle, but they will also do unavoidable damage to everyone in the room. Also, when they explode, they shoot out little orbs. If you're hit by these orbs, you're stunned and just take even more damage. So the idea is that you keep away from the spear location, not only so you don't take the damage from the initial impact, but you also avoid the orbs that are being sent out towards you. And do note that these spear explosions can be in very close proximity. When he does his draw power, 30-second later, big explosion on the entire raid. In that situation, that's where you want to have your healing cooldowns up. This happens every 2 minutes or so, and that's pretty much all you need to worry about in normal mode. In normal mode, you just need to nuke down the boss, make sure you deal with the ads the same way, and dodge the spears. However, in heroic mode, both Himdall and Herja will take turns in joining the encounter, and using all of their abilities from phase 1. Now, when either Himdall or Herja do jump down, it's vital that all DPS swap to them immediately, because as soon as they reach 85% health, they'll leave the encounter and come back at a later date. So you need to get them down as soon as possible and out of the way, because you want the damage free for when the draw power ads come in, otherwise you're not going to have enough damage. While Herja is down, the Expel Light is a complete pain because of the amount of damage it deals. It's even more important now that the players that receive the debuff are aware of exactly what is being cast. If the big explosion's being cast or the spears are going off and he's low, he has to use a cooldown, and healers need to spot heal that target. And whenever the Shield of Light is being cast, if there's spears going on at the exact same time, which is probably going to be the case, this is really where you want to use your raid-wide damage reductions, such as Spirit Links and Barriers, or even Aura Masteries if you've spec'd into it. They're exceptionally useful here because the damage from all the spears and everything else going off all at the exact same time can quite easily global you.
Now, when Himdall's down, it's not any easier. On top of his Dancing Blades, which really doesn't matter that much, I guess it's a little bit more movement that you have to do in a very movement-heavy phase anyway because of all the spears going on, but it's mainly the Horn of Valor that absolutely annihilates your raid. Not only does everyone need to be spread 5 yards, but because the spears are very likely to be shattering at the exact same time, you can be taking an absolute incredible amount of damage, and it's super important that you have some form of healing cooldown and really some form of personal cooldown just to survive this point, because it is very, very taxing on your healers. And if you do not spread at this point and you accidentally splash on someone else, it's pretty much guaranteed that either of you are going to die.
And that's the biggest thing with this particular phase, at least from a healing perspective, is about knowing exactly when to use a healing cooldown. And that just so happens to be typically when Herja is down for the shield, that's when you want to use damage reductions. Himdall when he casts Horn of Valor, and Odyn when he does his massive explosion. Apart from that, you want to try and keep away from using healing cooldowns as much as you possibly can, and try and heal up the passive spear damage yourself.
Now, Odyn will transition into phase 3 at 55% health, and it is super important that you don't go into that phase unprepared. You got to make sure that neither Heimdall nor Herja are active while you transition, as otherwise they will remain active when you go into phase 3, and you do not want to have to deal with that. However, just like when you transition to phase 1 to 2, if you have any of the draw power adds up, they're absolutely fine because the ability will be deactivated and you can just AoE them down underneath the boss.
Now, as soon as the phase starts, you'll immediately notice that areas of the ground are coated in like this holy stuff, and if you stand inside this, you take ticking damage. It just so happens that the room is split into 3 areas, and one of those areas will be clear, and as the fight goes on, different sections will light up and different sections will power down. It's just important that you always stood and tanking inside the area that is powered down, just so you don't take any damage. On top of this, the boss will also be doing bursts of damage to everyone in the raid that slowly ramps up over this phase, and it will eventually get to the point where it just one-shots people. So this sort of acts as a pseudo-enrage. The idea is that you kill the boss before he kills you in this phase. You just have to nuke him as hard as you possibly can. Saving Bloodlust for this phase is definitely a good idea. Now, a debuff for your entire raid to worry about is something called Storm of Justice. This is a debuff that lasts 5 seconds, and when it expires, you simply spawn a tornado, and these tornadoes do a lot of damage if you're hit by them, and will also throw you up into the air. And these things appear to last the entire fight. Now, because you're moving from one clear space to another every 30 seconds or so, it's vital that these tornadoes are placed in locations where they're not going to affect you when you decide to make these movements. So putting them right up against the walls is a great idea. Typically right at the start of the phase this is going to be really easy to do, but when you get towards the end and there's going to be a lot of tornadoes up, covering a lot of the real estate that you have available when it comes down to actually dropping them, you're not always going to have access to the walls. When you get towards the end of the fight, just put them wherever no one else is standing. That's generally the best way of doing it. And the only other thing that you need to deal with in this last phase is Stormforged Spear. This is a debuff that's placed on your tank that does virtually nothing until it expires. It will do a huge amount of damage to the tank based on how close they are to the boss. The further away you are, the less damage you take. And on top of this, the explosion will also do damage to the entire raid. However, this is a flat amount and isn't affected based on how far away you are. So as soon as you receive the Stormforged debuff, you'll want your co-tank to taunt, and then you just want to move as far away as you possibly can. This is the best time to make use of your own personal damage reductions, as well as using healers' external cooldowns. And keep in mind, this ability is physical damage. Make use of bops. Bops will make you take absolutely no damage from this ability whatsoever. When you are finally hit, you'll also get a debuff that increases the amount of damage you take from the spear, so you don't want to be in the position where you're taking the spear every single time, otherwise it will get to the point where you just will be one hit, no matter how far away you are from the boss. So you'll want to take turns at taking one each. So just to go over this phase once again, don't stand in the shit on the ground, put tornadoes up against the edge, healers outheal the burst of damage that goes out on the raid from Odyn himself and the Stormforged Spear, and tanks deal with the Stormforged Spear. And then hopefully, you kill him before he kills you. But thank you very much for watching. If this guide helped you out at all, then drop a like on it. If you'd like to know more about this boss or would like to see a written counterpart to it, then check out our guide over on Wowhead, a link is in the description. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also credit all of our guys on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you'd like to join this lovely group of people, there's also the link for that in the description as well. Thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you next time.
Thanks for watching.